Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. We would like to begin today's program by saying a big thank you to Sauce Labs for sponsoring today's webcast, and let you all know Sauce Labs provides the world's largest automation cloud for testing web and native hybrid mobile applications. Founded by the original creator of Selenium, Sauce helps companies accelerate software development cycles, improve application quality, and deploy with confidence across more than 350 browser, device, OS, platform combinations, including Windows, Linux, iOS, Android, and Mac OS X. Plugins for continuous integration tools like Travis, Jenkins, and Bamboo keep the development process simple, and the Sauce Labs Test Cloud allows developers to test more threads in parallel, increasing productivity by up to 80%. Sauce Connect allows secure testing behind a firewall and features like videos, screenshots, and HTML logs help identify issues faster. Thank you again, Sauce Labs. Folks, joining us today is John-David Dalton. He is the program manager at Microsoft working on the Chakra JavaScript engine, helping make your web applications, animations, and games run faster and smoother in Internet Explorer. He's also the creator of Lodash, co-maintainer of jsPerf and Benchmark.js, and contributes to other open source projects to help developers be more productive and write better JavaScript. Folks, I will turn the program over to John-David in just a moment, but first I'd like to go over a little housekeeping to help you get the most out of today's webcast. First, you'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for John-David. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you all to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for John-David, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for him and we can make sure we see it for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you'd like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you might need to give it permission to access your account. The Twitter widget will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweet so you don't have to. And today, folks, our hashtag is VelocityConf, all one word. If you have any trouble with the webcast, please take a look at your help widget. If you continue to have trouble, just post it in the group chat and one of our staff will help you right away. If you have choppy audio or stalled visuals, try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is to close any apps that could interfere. People always ask, so we'd like you to know we are recording today's webcast, and we will have the archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to John-David. Hello, John-David.
Hi. All right. So this talk is called Fearless Browser Test Automation. My name is John-David, and I am going to go into just a little bit of background about why I started getting into browser test automation. So let's see. Okay. So I created a library called Lodash, and Lodash is a JavaScript utility library that helps working with collections of arrays, objects, arguments objects, and allows more functional style programming, and also allows you to use methods that aren't available cross-browser or across engine versions. So we normalize things too, like for each, map, filter, and we do so in a way that makes them consistent, customizable, and performant too. So I'll go ahead and let's see if I'm going to test these URL features here. So I'm going to try to send you all the link. So let's try that. So there, I pushed a link. All right. So that is Lodash, and you can follow along there too. You can check out some documentation. The next slide is I had given my story to Sauce Labs, basically why I started using test automation, and you can follow along there too. That's bit.ly/Sauce Labs. I won't pop that one up just because that's more of background information. Cool. So manual testing, when I started, was like this. It was a pain, and that's because when I created Lodash, one of the things that separated me from the competition was the fact that I listed what I tested and I backed it up. But that meant testing all of these browsers. And when I started, I wasn't very selective about the environments I supported. I basically tried to support everything, which meant I had to test lots of things. And so that meant spending my weekends doing lots of manual testing. So I had to open up each browser, run the unit tests, and then see if they passed or failed, and do that over and over again. But it was compounded by the fact that Lodash is really customizable. So that means there's different builds too. So that means there's things like the modern build or the compat build, the underscore build. And then I tested things like the minified version of each, because bugs could creep in between the non-minified and the minified version. And then there was things like the AMD build, the NPM build, the Node build, the Common JS build. And so each one of those required testing. And then there was, well, it's not just an AMD build, it's required JS, and it's Cujo, or it's the Dojo loader, because AMD should work with a variety of AMD loaders, right? So I had to test all of those too. And that took up a lot of time, because then it wasn't just underscore or Lodash's test, it was underscores test and backbones test, because I programmed Lodash to work in all of those environments, so I needed to have tests for them. And so the variations, the tests, the browsers, the environments ate up a lot of my time. I basically would start on Saturday and end sometime on Sunday. So it was about two days of testing, just doing this point click thing over and over again for every release. And when I started out, I released 38 or so releases over the period of 1.5 years. So that's a lot of releases and a lot of days spent testing. So I was desperate for some way to automate that. And so testing is browsers, variations, versions, virtual machines, and time. So I'm going to break for a second and go to a screen share to see if I can do that. Let's see. Cool. Cool. Here we go. So my setup looks like this. I've got, probably similar to your setup as well, I've got all the Chromes, I've got all the IEs, of course, I've got all the Firefoxes, all the Operas, and all the Safaris. So I would actually go through and open every single one of those. And so by browsers, I mean it's a lot of browsers there to work with. Now I'm back here. And my machine is full of virtual machines as well, and that just eats up my hard drive. So this computer that I'm on is basically just JavaScript and browsers. There's nothing much else on there because it's all eaten up by virtual machines for things like Windows and different OS X versions, so I can install different versions of Safari. So this led to things being like, I tested on 5 browsers, 5 environments, 6 builds, 30+ versions. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. And the better way is browser test automation. And there's a couple of options for browser test automation. I'm going to cover Sauce Labs, but there's also Testling. I didn't go the Testling route because I was already using QUnit, and I didn't want to have to deal with another kind of adapter, so like a tap adapter. I had already patched QUnit in a way to work in all the other environments. So it would already run in Java, it would already run in Node, it would already run in all of these other old IEs and old Firefoxes and old Chromes. So I wanted to go with something that I could just support that out of the box, and so Sauce Labs was the option there. It also turned out that they had a lot of other features that I dig too that I couldn't find elsewhere. So I went with Sauce Labs, and this is the way that the test page looks for Lodash, and I can actually shoot that to y'all. So here we go. Let's see, it's this one right here. So there you go. So you'll see my test page. I'm lucky at the moment. No one's pushing anything through, so they should all be green, which is great. So let's see. Go back here. Push to audience. All right. And so what's nice about this is you can see every test that's passed, every platform. Yes, there's mobile too. What's different is that I can actually assign the tests labels. And so my tests are broken down into things like the underscore tests, Lodash tests, backbone tests. I can tag them as well. So I can do things like say, all right, this is the compat build, then the development build, which means it's the non-minified build, and it's the underscore test. So then I can actually go through and search for them by tags too, like show me all of the results for the compat build, or all of the non-minified builds, or all of the underscore builds, and I can view them. What's also nice is Sauce Labs allows you to take a screencast, so a recording of your test fails or passes. It's completely configurable. So I would use that to see exactly what went on wrong with my tests. And to do that, I configured QUnit to only show the failing tests. That way I could get a report, or I could at least see them inside the screencast. Later on I'll discuss how you can actually configure the results that you pass Sauce Labs so they'll actually generate the report for you, so you don't have to rely on the screencast. But the screencast is pretty handy, so I dig that feature. All right. So my setup is a little different than others. I wanted to have very little dependencies. So I just relied heavily on Travis CI. I use QUnit because it's what underscore and backbone use. Going forward, I would probably look for something else just because I run my code in lots of different environments, and QUnit at the moment is really tailored for the browser. There's some work in progress patches to make it a little bit more robust so it runs in Node and Java environments, but there's probably some other testing frameworks for you to use. But you can use Jasmine or Mocha or YUI. Sauce Labs supports a variety out of the box. You can also do a custom one as well, which I'll get into later. Grunt is optional. In my case, I'm not using Grunt. And then you'll need a Sauce Labs account. So you can sign up for a free Sauce Labs account that gives you an API token and I believe a limit of 3 concurrent test runs. So there's that to get started. So I relied on Travis CI to do all of the heavy lifting. And what that looks like is a big YML file. So you can see here it's pretty massive, and there's the URL there too, Lodash. What that is if you go to my GitHub repository, and I can actually send you a link to that, this is the travis.yml file there. Okay, so here's the URL for you. I've got lots of URLs prepped, so this might take just a second. Let's see. well, I'll cheat. I'll give you the one to the Sauce Labs helper, and then you can backtrack to the actual repository. So here we go. Here's the Sauce Labs helper. Keep in mind that file location because I'll be referencing that later too. Okay, and so towards the bottom of that file, you'll be able to see where I fork for Sauce Labs and push the test files to the service. So what's required for that, once that's done, that you'll get results that look like this. And basically, Travis CI will run open the Sauce Labs tunnel, establish a connection, run the local web server, and send the pages across the tunnel to Sauce Labs where they'll be run, and then it passes back the response. And in this case, everything is passing, which is the ideal case. So that's why everything looks green. Something else you can do is tie it into test coverage. So I do that as well on coveralls, and so I can show you that too. Let's see. Here's the coveralls repository or view of my coverage. And that is 100% test coverage, which is pretty nice. It's actually around about 100% test coverage because it's tricky to get every single line of code there through a single test pass. Overall, everything's tested because I test it in multiple environments, in multiple configurations, but test coverage only reads for that one pass, and so I have to do a lot of mocking and shimming to simulate different environments and kind of like load the file twice or 3 times to touch all of the code paths. So in that Travis YML file, not only am I doing Sauce Labs run, but test coverage. You could do things like performance runs as well there. So there's a little bit of a sidetrack for coveralls. One of the reasons I like them is that you can break down by files. So if you go into the Lodash AMD view and click around, you'll be able to inspect individual modules, and it will show line by line what's covered and what's not. So basically, if it's not covered, it's shown in red. So my one file that's not covered at the moment is inside the times module, where I have a fork for if the iteration count is larger than the max array size. But that's actually really hard to test because it turns out browsers don't like you going that high anyways. So I tried putting that in a web worker, and it crashed. And I tried being tricky with it, and I could not get that to run. So that's like the one line of code that's not being hit. But it's all right. I mean, I've got it there for the what-if case. So yeah. Next is the checklist. So to get my setup running, I required a static file server, so I got xstatic. I required a request to handle the REST API, making that easier. I didn't need to require chalk, but I liked the green and the red output inside the Travis CI test run, so I used chalk to do that. And then you'll need Sauce Tunnel, and that establishes the tunnel connection and allows you to work with Sauce Labs. So I went with the REST API because I didn't want to have to deal with WebDriver. I wanted something that was really simple, and I just wanted to be able to say, hey, pass Sauce a URL, a JSON object, and be done with it. And so that's the REST API route, and you can see that here. So there is the REST API. That's pretty straightforward. Inside the code base, it's basically just constructing your options, which there are plenty of as well, And there's actually, it's covered in the documentation too. You can basically say, hey, I want it to record a screencast. I don't want it to record a screencast for fails. I want it to take screenshots. I want it to time out after 30 seconds or 6 minutes or whatever. It's all completely configurable. So I go ahead and kind of tailor that up too. In the first link I sent on the Lodash was my saucelabs.js file, and that's where you'll see how I wire up Sauce Labs. I basically start the static file server and handle the connection to the Sauce tunnel, and then try to avoid callback hell and because it's Node, and get everything working there. Eventually, I'd like to use promises, but that's a little bit far out for me. It's a nice to have. I'll talk about Grunt Sauce Labs later, and they actually have promises, so they kind of clean that up. But you can see it. It's a relatively small file that deals with configuration and establishing the connection. So moving on to some of the cool. Okay, so establishing test runs is nice, but one of the things that I liked about Sauce Labs over other alternatives is I could test IE compat modes. As part of creating Lodash, we fix bugs in IE compat mode. So like say you're running IE 11 but in IE 8 compat mode. I needed to be able to test that code. And so what I was able to do is if you go to the, you know what, I'm going to actually just share my screen because this will be easier because I'll be talking about code here. So let's share my screen. Okay. Let's see. Sauce Labs. Okay. So what's nice is this bit right here. And I have a slide on it too, but since I'm in the code, I'll go ahead and just talk about it here. That right there, it allows me to detect that the file path is HTML, and then I send the xcompat header, compatible header for IE. So IE compat modes can be set inside meta tags or inside the HTTP request header for the HTML. And so I just do it with the HTML. So based on a test parameter, in this case, if the URL I'm passing has a compat mode option, I can actually, on the fly, test my page running it in compat mode, which is great. So that's really handy, and I couldn't do that in other test automation services. So I really dig that. Let's see. Whoop. Here we go. Back to it, the cool. And so here's the other view of that. I believe you should get that now. There. Basically the exact same thing. Now, then the next thing that's cool is that you can actually tailor your environments. So I knew that if I am in a compat mode, I'd only want to be testing the browsers that it's relevant to. So basically all the modern or the newer browsers. So like, I shouldn't really say newer. All the browsers that support compat modes, because look, IE8's in that list too, and that's definitely not new. But it allows me to filter the list. So that way, when I say, hey, I want to test compat modes, I'm not testing Firefox, and I'm not testing Chrome or Safari in this case. And so you're able to sit there and tweak a little bit the platforms you want to run. So for example, when I'm running AMD, I know that I don't need to test some ancient version of Opera that AMD doesn't support. So there's time ahead of it of sending these things to Sauce Labs to tweak your configuration. The next thing that's cool is being able to set and support custom unit test libraries. Part of supporting any unit testing lib is setting the global test results. And this is handy for the REST API. So basically, using QUnit here, I just assign a callback for when the unit tests have run, and I assign the details object to the global test results. Now on Sauce Labs side, they check for this global value to be set, and once it's set, that's how they know to stop running your unit test. So in my case, I'm just passing the details object, but that really just has your pass-fail details, right? And so Sauce won't build a fancy report for me. It'll just build something that says, hey, this is your tests that have passed and failed, and it will look like QUnit because it's got the ability to detect that I am testing a QUnit library. But if I would actually flesh that out a bit more and give it test names and assert names, it would be able to build a very pretty report in the style of QUnit, or if I was using Jasmine, in the style of Jasmine. So you can get a fancy report that's really handy when you're testing mobile, because one of the things I learned when I started testing mobile is that emulator screens are really small, and I can't see the results as well when something fails because I was relying heavily on the screencast option. So I actually downloaded the emulator when I should have been doing is making my the data I report to Sauce Labs more robust so I could get a better report. So that's still something I need to do. But that's a lifesaver, especially when you're dealing with tiny, tiny screens and mobile devices that Sauce Labs automates. So there's the cool continued. Say you don't want to muck around with a giant YML file and dealing with wiring up the Sauce tunnel, knowing what ports to deal with, any of that kind of configuration, you can let Grunt do it. So there's another option which is really handy, and it turned out whenever I was developing my solution, Grunt Sauce Labs was doing a lot of it already. I wanted to avoid having a dependency on Grunt just because Lodash at the time was a dependency of Grunt, and so I kind of wanted to keep the dependencies clean of testing against myself. So I went the node dependency route. But if you're already using Grunt, great. This will tackle it, and if not, you may want to look at this as an option because it's pretty robust, and it takes everything down to essentially a JSON file of browsers to test. So here's the GitHub handle. Basically, if you do github.com/this username and Grunt Sauce Labs, that will be the repository for you. If you need, I can send the URL too. So let's go ahead and do that. Here's the URL. There. So this is a Grunt task for QUnit, Jasmine, Mocha, YUI, or custom frameworks. It takes away a lot of the config or a lot of the background things you would need to know. So you don't need to know about tunnel IDs or if you're testing in a pull request, or you don't even have to handle test retries now. So one of the cool things I would get into in my section is that I handle test fails, connection fails. So when you're testing, when you're dealing with browser test automation, there is a lot of things that can go wrong that aren't necessarily related to your code running on your unit tests. Because you're establishing a connection, going over a tunnel, if there's something going on Travis CI's side or something going on, a hiccup in Sauce Labs, there could be test hangs, test fails that are the result of timeouts, test congestion, tunnel issues where a tunnel for some reason is timing out. And all of that can lead to a fail for your unit tests that is not related to your code. So what I've done is I added retries all the way down. So I modified extended QUnit to support test retries. So what that means is that for asynchronous tests, I noticed that there could be a timer drift, especially in old browsers. Basically, you're trying to do a lot of things, and then when you add set timeout on top of that, the timers can drift a bit and give you false fails for your unit tests. So what I do is I have a configurable option, and I'll pass you the URL now, for QUnit extras. QUnit extras is the layer that I've added to QUnit to allow it to run in Java, to handle retries, to print out to the console, to work in Node. And so it's a bunch of like UMD kind of wrapping around it to get it to initially work. It's also requires a certain version of QUnit because they had broken exports in later versions, which is why I've said before, like, I've gotten it to work just so for QUnit in all these environments, but there's probably other options for you. So here is the QUnit extras. Cool, and that's actually a link to the source file, so you can kind of browse around that and see how I simulate set timeout and clear timeout in Java if you're interested. I actually need to revise that to run inside the newer Java runtime Nozhorn because its API is slightly different, so I need to tweak that. But there's that. So what I've added was the retries, but I also needed to add test exclusions too, because Lodash is a superset of underscore, which means we have additional functionality and we have things that don't necessarily align with underscore's API. Now we do have a build that is one-to-one, but in the other times, in the other cases, we really we want to kind of exclude certain tests we know will fail. For example, underscore may throw an error where Lodash does not, because they happen to use a native method if it exists, where we rely on a fallback. So I added the ability to exclude those, so they'll show up as passing. Also, I noticed that there were some issues in some of the Sauce Labs VMs for their browsers. So, for example, there was some weird old Safari issue that would only show up in the remote Safari, but not in my local version of it. So I just excluded that test too, because I knew that running it locally it was okay, and that chances are it's just some weird revision of Safari, a slight minor version that they had. So it allowed me to exclude those. So being able to retry tests, async tests, and exclude some potentially buggy ones helps smooth over some issues. Next, I retry things at the level of the job. So when you create a connection to Sauce Labs, you're basically saying, hey, I want it to run browsers A, B, and C, and that can be one job. But what I've done is made a single browser test a single job. And so if that fails for some reason, like I get a timeout, I detect that, I remove the entry from their logs, and then I rerun that job. And so I've got now retries at the JavaScript timing level and at the job level. So the next is, well, what happens if multiple jobs start failing? If multiple jobs start failing, then it could be the result of a bad tunnel connection. And that used to be more of a problem before they upgraded their tunnel from it used to be like a Java app, and then they rewrote it in C++, I believe. So once they did that, tunnel issues are less common, but they still happen from time to time, as things on the internet will fail from time to time. And so what I do is I can detect if multiple jobs start failing, shut down the tunnel, reestablish the tunnel, and begin where I left off. And so doing that allows me to have retries all the way down and have a stable testing environment that only fails when there's actually a test issue, which is great because if you looked at my YML file, you'll see I'm doing a lot of Sauce Labs run in a single Travis CI job. So that meant that if a single false fail entered the results, it would fail the entire Travis job. So I had something like 6 Sauce Labs run per one Travis job. And that's because I have so many build configurations to test. Like I needed to test the AMD builds and the Menify builds and all of that. And that meant I was leveraging concurrent jobs, and I wanted to avoid having a single false fail throw away the entire job. So I'm leveraging concurrent jobs, and so to do that, you need a Grunt tunnel ID. If you look at the Sauce Labs helper that I linked to earlier inside, so basically /test/saucelabs.js, you'll see I establish a tunnel name semi-unique based on the Travis CI environment variable for the current test run, which happens to be unique too. One of the things to consider, I'll just take you to it since I've drifted into the next slide. To wrap up the Grunt Sauce Labs thing, the slide I'm on now is basically an example of the configuration you need for Grunt, which is just a JSON object with the browsers you want to test. It's pretty straightforward. It also handles the retry stuff. So where I was saying about a test retry, a job retry, they do that. Now they don't handle the tunnel retry at the moment, and of course they don't handle the async test retry at the moment, just because that's specific per unit testing lib. But they do handle the job retry, which is also a common issue. So they'll handle that for you if you use the Grunt Sauce Labs task too. And it's pretty straightforward. You can configure it too. You can add tags like the screenshot shows and some of your testing URLs. But that's a really good one to get up and run with test automation. It tackles a lot of the roadblocks that I had run into whenever I was trying to piece this together earlier. So there's Grunt Sauce Labs. So going to the things that make you go, these are these roadblocks that I was mentioning that I started to kind of cover. One of them is if you're dealing with Travis, you'll want to encrypt your Sauce Labs API token. And so to do that, you need to gem install Travis. Now I'm not a Ruby dev, JavaScript, so that was kind of new for me. Then you also have to encrypt your key, which is Travis encrypt sauce _access_key equals your key. Before I was wondering, does it accept multiple environment variables? And it does. But in this case, we're only dealing with one. And so inside your Travis YML file, inside the one that I linked to earlier, you'll see a secure section. And that's where I put the encrypted key there for the Sauce Labs run. What's interesting to note is that if you have Sauce Labs set up for you, or if you are using the encrypted keys from Travis CI, if someone does a pull request and you try to run your testing through there, the encrypted variables won't work because it's for your account. And so when the person that does the pull request, it will not return it will not do encrypted variables for them. So you'll have to filter that out. And you can see that filter inside the saucelabs.js file I linked to earlier at the very top. I basically detect if Travis CI sets an environment variable to tell you if it is a pull request. And so I basically detect if it's a pull request and then punt on the Sauce Labs testing because I don't want to deal with the encryption key issue. I could expose the key publicly, and chances are no one's going to abuse it. It is a public project after all, but I go ahead and keep it locked down anyway. So there's that to consider. Keep in mind that if you are testing, you'll need to test with the global test results variable. Without that, Travis won't know, Sauce Labs won't know that you're done testing. You'll need to hook that into it. I believe Sauce Grunt Grunt Sauce Labs may help you out there. I included inside Grunt. Wow, I'm getting mixed up with all these prefixes. QUnit extras. QUnit extras, I handle the global variable setting for me because I want to use it with testing things like Sauce Labs. And then there's a bit for the Android testing. So I mentioned that I do test in mobile devices. In this case, it's the emulators. And I happen to run into an issue where, especially with AMD, where it would load the file, but it would load them incompletely. And so it would then throw syntax errors. So it would say, hey, I've loaded 150 modules, but it would load them partially and then start throwing JavaScript errors. So what I had to do to avoid issues there was basically add an on-error handler to the window, so window on error, and detect if that happened, basically set the global results to failed. And so by doing that, it would trigger, or actually I would set it to the JavaScript error object. And so my code detects if there is an error being thrown to try to retry that test. And so it would fall into my Sauce Labs helper's retry logic for the job and then retry that job. It's sporadic. I'm not quite sure what causes that, if it's something with my dependency on Xstatic, so maybe there's a bug there with the content linked headers, but Android seems to be very picky about that, and so I would get just random crashes with that. So by incorporating the on-error handler inside my unit tests, I'm able to tackle that issue. And you can view that under lodash/test/test.js in the GitHub repository. So you can navigate there and see, it's actually test/index.html, and you'll see the on-error handler there. What I've done with Lodash is have a single file. So it's a single test.js file. I know a lot of devs will split them up into multiple files, but I found that for testing across multiple environments, a single JS file helped because I could run it through Java, Ringo, Rhino, Norwal, Phantom.js, the browser, all running a single test file, and even test coverage. So Istanbul is what I use for test coverage, and I pass it off to coveralls. A single test file is great for that. It crawls it, it runs it. It's a lot of keeps things a lot simpler for me. So if you're testing, you may want to consider that. I didn't want to have to deal with trying to work with loading files in different environments. So like in Node, it makes it really easy to load files, but in other ones, it's not quite as easy. So just trying to figure out how to load one file is a lot easier than trying to figure out how to load 13 of them. So I kept that simple there. Moving on, one of the things that have since been resolved is Sauce Tunnel used to require a very specific version number. And setting your tunnel identifiers required an undocumented API key, which are hurdles that I had initially, like getting testing started, but they have since then been completely smoothed over. Sauce Labs got a facelift on its documentation, and it's been expanded too. They've fixed those issues with the tunnel, and everything has been ironed out. So I'm actually the talk was to help remove the fear of browser test automation, because it used to be really intimidating, but now it's gotten to a point where if you've got Grunt, you load in Grunt Sauce Labs and you're good to go. And even if you just want to do the REST API and hack at it on your own, like I did with my Sauce Labs helper, it's to the point to where it's a lot easier now, and there's a lot less gotchas. But I hope that I've helped you with some of them here today, and I will open the floor to questions in a little bit. One of the things that I have received before is how to set up manual testing. So remote testing is great, but sometimes you need to fall back to manual testing. So I'm going to cover just a little bit of that now, and then I'll do a screen share for that. So here we go. Okay, so I should be sharing my screen. So let's get into automation. Before, I had things like this, and you could see all of my Chromes. That is, I'm leveraging something in OS X that allows you to create applications from folders. And in a second, I'll show you links to Appify, which is a tool that allows you to create applications easily from these folder structures. But that's where I kind of got the general idea. I manually create these now, but there's Appify can kind of walks you through that. And then there's a program called Install All Firefoxes, which does what the name says. It installs them. So the trouble with manual testing things like Chrome is that they auto-update. And that's tricky because you want to be able to test a single environment. Now, ideally, everyone's upgrading their browser, right? Like it's all auto evergreen. But in reality, you have different versions of Node, different versions of Android that are locked into various versions of Chrome or Chrome-like browsers. So one of my side projects is called Platform.js. So I happened to notice that browsers that were identifying themselves as Android would be really similar to some of these earlier Chrome versions because I would be able to kind of find the V8 version of them and compare, and they would actually have identical bugs too. So having older versions of Chrome can help you out. So here's how to do that. So this is the real browsers are in a folder called Hidden, where I keep all of the original files for the browser. What these are here are actually like shelves of the browser. This is, if I go and say show package contents, it's just a folder with a bash script in it. And the bash script is named the exact same thing that the folder is named, and that's actually required for this to work. You could do it without that, but it would require a little bit more configuration. This is just really simple. It's you go contents Mac OS, your bash script is the name of the file, and then let's look at what that does. And this is basically just a path to the application and setting up a custom profile for this. So that means each browser, each Chrome I open has their own profile. And then the Edge version of Chrome, the current stable is I use as the default profile because that's my everyday browser for OS X. I also, at work, I have a Windows box. So, of course, I've got IE and Firefox and Chrome loaded there, too, so I can do all my testing there. But this is all it takes is a bash file and a folder, and you've got yourself a link to Chrome that establishes a profile. And, of course, I basically just copied the browser icon to each one, and you can do that very simply too. If you do get information, you can just click on the icon and Control-C or Control-V, I believe, to the next folder, and click on their icon and replace that. And that's it. That's all you have to do there. Now, that doesn't stop the auto-updater. The auto-updater will continue to try to update, so you have to remove that. So now I'll go back and show you some of those links. So here we go. So here is, let's see, a gist to show you how to uninstall the Google Update. Now, this is assuming that you are staying on top of your browser usage and that you know when to update your browsers because, and staying on the most up-to-date browser is good for security and performance and all that good stuff. So disable it because you're wanting to test all these good things. So here is the script to do that. This is a gist. I actually just kind of went to the internet and said how to uninstall it and came across this, and this seems to work pretty well. So I run that, One of them actually errors out, the other one works, so whatever works for you. If this does it, that's great. And that's how I disable auto updates for Chrome, and it allows me to have all those versions. You used to be able to grab old versions on like old apps.net or .com or something like that, but they seem to have removed all of the Chrome ones, so it may be tricky for you to find an old version of Chrome. If you need something like that, let me know. I'll hook you up with whatever I have. It's great for testing, so I'm glad I have them. You can use something like Navi for node testing, so that's N-A-V-E. If you go to npmjs.org, search for Navi, you'll be able to install multiple versions of Node that way. There's also other ones too, like NVM. I think that's the name for that one. I use Navi just because it's maintained by Isaac, so who used to be the lead for Node and is the lead on NPM. So I trust that code base for that. So I use that to test multiple versions of Node as well locally. For Firefox, there's a nice script called install all Firefoxes, and that's this one here. And that does what the name says. Let's see, let me go back here. It basically installs them and automatically creates the profile. So if you don't create a different profile, it'll always try to open, you'll only be able to open like one version of Firefox at a time. Creating different profiles allows me to open different versions of Chrome and different versions of Firefox at the same time and test them. So that was kind of my secret sauce to being able to test all of these things locally. For Opera is a little bit easier. All I had to do was download the application and right-click and lock it. Because its auto-update will try to update, but if you lock it, it won't be able to because it will ask you for permission, and you just deny it every time. I think I might have also gone through in some of these versions of Firefox and told them to disable their auto-update as well. I have not done that in a while, so I probably have a couple versions that will try to auto-update, which could be problematic. But install all Firefoxes, it kind of makes it easy for me to do that. So maybe they've automatically disabled that. The real issue I've had was Chrome auto-updating under my feet, and I lost a couple of versions that way because it updated them. So that's how you do that locally. So worst case, if you can't do it automatically, or you're not able to push immediately, or you just want to try something quickly, you can do them locally too. So hopefully that helps set that up. Right now I'm showing docs to the REST API, additional config, and connect. The REST API kind of breaks down all the things you need to do to be able to push your test to their service. The additional config breaks down all the options for you. So before I mentioned and said, hey, there's tons of options, I'm not kidding. You can get down very, very nitty-gritty in the Sauce Labs options. I have just barely scratched the surface of that, like being able to say I only want to record screencasts for fails. By default, I think it may try to record screencasts for passes too, but normally if everything is green, you don't care what the screencast had to say, right? So I disabled that. But now I will open the floor to questions. So there's a QA panel here, so let's see. Wow, lots of questions. Let's see here. Okay, so the first question is from Kyle J, and it's, what are some ways we can use Sauce for UI testing besides manual? Okay. So Sauce Labs supports WebDriver too, and that should be able to support some ability of UI testing. Now, I did not get into that, so that's still something I'm not as familiar with. I just wanted something that would run my unit tests, and I didn't want to have to mess with WebDriver, because that was getting way too complex for me. I just wanted to pass it a URL and have it load up the the URL and give me a pass or fail on my unit tests. But I believe it offers that support for you. All I covered today was really the REST API because that was what I would need to get my testing up. But it should offer that. Unfortunately, I'm not the best person to talk to about that. But yeah, it should have an option for you for that. Cool. The next one is from Christopher M. It says, surely with auto-updating browsers, it's less important to test older versions. That is incorrect. There's lots of corporate environments that have old browsers, usually old versions of IE. And so I have those to test. Now, you're right. A lot of the modern Edge browsers, you'll be able to auto-update, especially if they're on a desktop. But mobile devices are things where users may or may not be opting into their auto-update and may be stuck on a different version of their Android-like browser or Chrome browser or Firefox browser. And so in my case, I have very specific code paths for the library that fix bugs in specific versions of the browsers, and so I need to make sure that the fix that I have in place works. So when I say that the compat build works for older environments, I need to make sure that what I'm saying is true and validate that. So I do test in that. Now, the actual percentage of developers using Firefox 21, I don't know. Probably slim. But in my case, I've got that contract with the users that say, hey, I'm supporting this. So I've got to test it, which is why Sauce Labs allows you to test a range of browsers. They go back really far. They go back almost as far as I have locally, which is they go back to like 3.0. I believe I have mine to 2.0. No one should ever be on that. That's an ancient browser. I test on that kind of just for bragging rights. But yeah, there's more than just the bleeding edge. I know that as developers, we enjoy the bleeding edge, and I do push for the bleeding edge. Like Lodash, we push the modern build first. Like, please support and try to push for modern browsers because that avoids the performance issues, the security issues. It gives you new features. So we push for modern, but we do support the old ones. And so if we claim support, we've got to test them. Let's see. It says, Michael G says, what if a plugin interfered with Lodash? Sauce Labs VMs are very sterile. How would you test for a more complicated setup? That's a good question. So inside Lodash, Lodash works with, should be able to work as a third party on a page containing scripts that you don't own. That's a feature we have over underscore, which allows itself to use what it thinks is native methods. So Lodash will detect if a method is native, and it does that through a clever parsing of the deconstructed function. So if you take a function and you coerce it to a string, you can get its toString value. So we do that to a native function, remove any identifying characteristics to that function to where all that's left is like the meat of that native function, and then use that as a way to detect other native functions. Now what I do in Lodash is, remember I said for test coverage I had to load Lodash a couple of times. So in one of those times I taint the environment. I assign no-op methods to like object.prototype that has own property, and I mess with object.keys, and I mess with function prototype.bind or object.define property, or all these environment things, right? Especially stuff that people like to shim, because there's some libraries that didn't detect if a method already exists, and they'll pave over a native method with their own method. And so I always opt to trust native over third-party code. And so I basically go through there, and it's called the Lodash Bizarro. And that's where I go through and I throw in all the wrenches into the environments and then run them and test it against Lodash. And so Lodash should essentially still survive that and work. And so that's how I do that. And I do that inside Sauce or outside Sauce. It's just part of my test harness and part of the mocking of that environment. Also, Sauce allows you to execute some scripts and executables on its end too. Now that gets into some of the more advanced side of sauce that I haven't had to deal with yet, but I'm sure you could tell it a path to an executable and it will execute that. But I've never tried that, so you could probably do some setup on that end too. Cool. So I'm going to try to pronounce this name. Forgive me, but it's because I will probably butcher it. But it's Shram W says, "What is the best strategy when we know we are going to test one page at one endpoint, but based on the platform and browser, it can have different rendering?" Okay. So I'm testing for functional completeness, so that means just making sure that I get the correct output. If you're testing for visual, that gets a little bit trickier, and I'm not sure how to handle that in Sauce. I've done it in Phantom.js, but again, that's more testing for like I have a screenshot of a reference image, and I want to test my output and see if it's close to that reference image. And so I use Phantom.js to take a screenshot, run it through an image diff algorithm, and then if it's within a certain threshold, it passes, and if not, it fails. Sauce Labs does allow you to take screencasts, so you can do visual confirmation of tests, but I'm not sure how to automate that at the moment. So Sikandar says, when will we see real-time project automated testing examples in browsers? That is a good question. What's neat about Sauce Labs is that you can see your browsers being tested in real time, and you can actually jump into the actual test run and hijack it and take that over. So that's pretty close. It's not something that's embedded in the actual browser or service, but or part of like a browser plugin, but it's part of Sauce Labs. And so while the browser's actually running, you can jump in. And I've done that to test some really bizarro environment issues where I wasn't able to reproduce it locally. So you can jump in and poke around the console log and do all the other things like that while the test is actually running. And I found that to be really helpful. Okay, so Ricky G says, what is the use of Travis? So Travis CI is a continuous integration service. So basically you can tie it into GitHub. So when you do a commit, it will automatically run your unit tests. So that's what I've done. I've hooked it into my project. So every time I do a commit, if I don't contain the token CI skip, it will run it through Travis CI. So it runs my unit tests in various versions of Node, in Ringo, in Rhino. It does the test coverage, so it does things like the Istanbul and coveralls, and it spins up Sauce Labs runs. So that's what I use to kind of bootstrap my testing per commit. All right, let's see. Okay, so there's Beth H. says, ask a question related to the Sauce Labs encryption keys for access. And so I covered that a bit in my talk, but I didn't encrypt my username. So I left that public because it's publicly accessible. So basically when I access my results, that's the username. In this case, it's Lodash. But you can encrypt that too. Basically, Travis CI allows you to encrypt multiple environment variables, and it could be included as a single encrypt string, or you can do multiple declarations of secure plus the hash. Basically, what it does on its end is when you're running your unit tests, it decrypts them because you're the one running them. It doesn't do that for PRs because it doesn't want other devs to be able to poke around and see those keys exposed. So that's another reason why they don't work on pull requests. So you should be able to leverage the Travis encrypt commands that I referenced earlier in the slide. Jeffrey K asks, how long does it take to reconnect to the tunnel and rerun a test? That's a good question too. Earlier, before the rewrite of the connect, it would take a couple minutes. And by a couple, I mean like 5 or 6. But now it's really quick, so it should be like 2 minutes or less. And those times are really important because Travis CI gives you a max of 50 minutes to complete your test, and after that it goes, you've gone too long, and it cuts you off. So everything needs to complete. So that's why like these 6 Sauce Labs runs that I do per Travis job, they really need to get done and get done quickly. And if things start failing and things start retrying, it really pushes that 50 minutes. But normally my tests finish in like 20 minutes, and that's the longest one. So I've gone through from 2 days worth of testing, sitting there pressing buttons, right, like trying to like maybe watch a movie and do this at the same time, to just 30 minutes max, and it's passive. I'm doing something else. I'm working on code, and it's running the unit tests for me. So that's really handy. Swati J says, is there a cross-browser click and replay recording of tests? Yes. So Sauce Labs does record the screencast for you on any test run. So you can, if anything fails, you can pull up, it gives you a URL, and then you can view the test run from there. So Santosh T says, what's the difference between Selenium WebDriver testing and Lodash? So I opted to do the simple REST API. So for JavaScript testing, especially if you're just dealing with your unit test runs, that may be the way to go. Selenium WebDriver gets into a little bit more overhead than I wanted. I just wanted to pass a URL. So that's the difference. I went with the easy, like get a URL, pass it a JSON object, and be done with it. Let's see. I think that's it. There's one question that says, can you easily run different versions of browsers without virtual machines? And yes, so I went over that. There's some browsers where I couldn't. So there is a project that, especially for like older versions of OS X, that would allow you to run multiple Safari versions on one machine, and that's called Multi-Safari. And I run that on some of the older VMs. But moving forward, I really just had to use VMs, and that's kind of a bummer because OS X images take up a lot of my hard drive because they're rather large. And then, of course, for Windows, I have different versions of IE, so that's different VMs there. But their OSs are a little bit smaller, so I can cram more of them on. All right. I think that's it for Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, John-David. Folks, we've
Awesome.
pushed out to you all in the group chat John-David's Twitter handle, so you can follow up with him if you have additional comments or questions, and he can respond there. John-David, as we close out, is there anything additional you'd like to leave the audience with today?
I'd just like to say, if you don't test with Sauce Labs, that's fine. Test with something, and preferably get it automated. So I hope that I've helped remove some of the roadblocks, shown you that it's probably easier than you thought to get going, and I hope you all unit test. So that's it. Cool.
Excellent webcast today. Thank you so much, John-David, for being with us and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise with us.
All right. Thank you.
Folks that attended our webcast today, we thank you for attending and hope you've benefited from it. And a big thank you to those of you that got up early or stayed up late, as we had people from all over the world today. So we do thank you for being with us. And in closing, we would like to say a big thank you to Sauce Labs for sponsoring our webcast and let you all know Sauce Labs provides the world's largest automation cloud for testing web and native hybrid mobile applications. Founded by the original creator of Selenium, SOS helps companies accelerate software development cycles, improve application quality, and deploy with confidence across more than 350 browser, device, OS, platform combinations, including Windows, Linux, iOS, Android, and Mac OS X. Plugins for continuous integration tools like Travis, Jenkins, and Bamboo keep the development process simple, and the SOS Labs Test Cloud allows developers to test more threads in parallel, increasing productivity by up to 80%. SOS Connect allows secure testing behind a firewall, and features like videos, screenshots, and HTML logs help identify issues faster. Thank you again, SOS Labs. Folks, this will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.